And we're live.
Yay, we're live. Welcome to Midweek Mochas. This time at the end of the week because we're still recovering from travel. So, we are recovering from travel.
Yes.
Yeah, we had an out of town
When
visit.
Google tells you it's a 9-hour drive, but you're traveling with 6 kids, plan on 13 to 14 hours each direction. Pro tip.
Yes.
Although that, to be fair, that included a stop for an online class for 2 of our kids, 1 in each direction.
Yes. Huge shout out to the Texas Welcome Center, which has a nice private little room we were able to.
It's not a fully private room. It's a semi-private room. We didn't even know it was there. The Texas Welcome Center in Wascom, Texas, on the Texas-Louisiana border, right along Interstate 20. We were headed westbound out of Shreveport, heading back home. And, the timing worked out. One of our sons had an online class he needed to log into. So we pull in and we start getting him set up, and one of the folks working at the station came by, and
In the previous direction, we basically, our son took it from his
different
phone.
son did his class from his phone sitting in the parking lot, and the rest was just kind of wandered around. So he had a quiet car to work from. Well, that wasn't going to work for this particular class for this particular child. So we start pulling out the laptop, and I hotspot off my phone, and we set up the microphone, and he starts getting logged in, and this wonderful clerk, and I wish I remembered her name, but she came by and she said, we have a semi-private room over here. I was like, no, I've been driving through this station since it opened. I had no idea you had a semi-private room here. I knew you had really nice bathrooms and plenty of brochures about the great wonders of the great state of Texas. So, we moved the whole circus, and there was a little table and there was some chairs, and it was just a nice little space. And so we got him set up right as his class was starting, and he was able to do his class. When he was done, he was able to pack up. He had power, he had quiet, he had a table to set all the stuff on, so he wasn't balancing it precariously on his legs. And it really worked out well. So if you happen to be driving across the Louisiana-Texas border and you're going westbound into Texas out of Shreveport on I-20, you happen to need to take a call or what have you, I can highly recommend that you just kind of stop at that welcome center and take advantage of being able to just get off the road for an hour while you do whatever that work or school related call is. Which brings us to the topic of today, because what do you do in a car with 6 kids for, 9, 10, 11 hours of driving in each direction?
And more broadly speaking, it's part of the extended question. You're homeschooling. You are not stuck on anyone else's schedule, but whatever is the other things driving your family, which means you can do things like impromptu road trips to deal with family matters. But if you're not trying to work around an online class, but yes, you can still manage those even when you're doing those trips. What do you do for that time on the road? You can decide to drop school, but you've still got stuff that you need to do to fill that time. Otherwise, you end up with very cranky people. So what we ended up doing for this trip is we packed audiobooks.
Well, to be fair, I had packed Queen's Greatest Hits and I think some Metallica and some other music to listen to.
I think you also had some Renaissance polyphony.
Yeah, I did. I had Victoria's Requiem of 1605. But no one actually wanted to listen to the music Dad brought. They didn't want to necessarily listen to their own music. They just didn't want to listen to my music. So it's not like we were fighting over, radio stations or whatever.
No.
But what we found on our trip last fall, which we've talked about in a previous video, we brought a copy of The Big Short, which again, not kid friendly, but it provoked a lot of discussion as we were driving around New Mexico and listening to this audiobook. Well, this most recent trip this past weekend, we were driving to and from, but between Texas and Louisiana. And the audiobook we brought was called Theater of War by Bryan Doerries. And it definitely deals with some heavy material, things like death and trauma. And so our younger ones had some questions that we had to kind of periodically pause and listen to. And I think even given the length of the trip, we only got about halfway through the book.
Yeah.
But anyway, fascinating book and very enjoyable.
And topical in a way, because the book centers on the power of Greek tragedy, in particular,
To heal wounds.
Yes. And so it was very thought-provoking and educational, not necessarily scholastic, but definitely educational, and the sort of thing that, as our younger children eventually do end up studying Sophocles, Euripides,
Euripides, Eupaphides.
and which is the other one who did the Oresteia?
Aeschylus,
thank you. As they study those, rather they'll have a little more context for what these plays were written for, and maybe why they're not quite getting them, because they are plays written for people who have lived hard lives.
They're definitely plays that make more sense to me when I revisit them in middle age than they necessarily made to me when I first encountered them. Well, I first encountered them when I was 13.
Yeah,
12 or 13.
That would have been about middle school, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I encountered them again in college, both in our college lit classes and in our college drama classes.
Yeah, we got Death March through them like 2 or 3 times in college.
And we've revisited them again at least. Oh, well, I know I revisited them again at least 3 times in college. I got a really, really steady dose of the Greeks. And at least for us, it wasn't just reading them. We were actually doing productions, performances, textual analysis from how would you stage this?
Yeah.
I remember one of our classmates was inspired by the movie Donnie Brasco to do an updated Prometheus Bound. That was kind of like a 70s block party with like cars rolling through the stage and stuff. And we did it on a playground and whatnot. Lighting that was a lot of fun because generators make a lot of noise, and it's hard to hear the dialogue of a Greek tragedy if you've got generators running to power the lights. So
yeah,
we did figure it out. It was a lot of fun.
And oddly enough, it actually worked. The concept,
it worked.
The concept worked. It really
worked, unlike so many other concepts, like that antebellum Romeo and Juliet you were unfortunately involved with. But
yeah, that was a hard one.
We'll pass over that in silence.
So that was a really remarkable experience because we brought it along because we wanted to listen to it. But it was one of those moments where it opened up so much conversation with the kids about so many different things.
We still have to finish it.
We do still have to finish it. And in the midst of it, we ended up having conversations about screenwriting and
character development
and a whole host of other things that as we were going along. And it was really valuable. And that's one of the really nice things about an audiobook is that you can listen to it while you are doing other things like driving down an interstate highway. And it has the opportunity to share a story with other people.
Or a U.S. highway when you go off the beaten path and pass through small towns that the interstate highway system bypassed.
Yes, because Google tells us that was the faster route, and it was.
It was significantly faster, although Google did try to route us a couple of places where roads didn't exist. So
not as many times as our New Mexico trip.
Well, that's true. That's true. But, it's always an adventure. You just can't trust Google completely. I mean, you can't trust Google at all.
No, you can't trust Google. But as they are very nicely hosting our streaming service at the moment.
Oh, they're nothing nice about it. We're the product being sold.
Yes.
But back on topic. So audiobooks, reading with your ears. This is a point I am very, very passionate about because it's a big leap for so many people. And I know it was a big leap for me. It was a big adjustment.
Some of it was that you did not actually like audiobooks.
I hate being read to.
Yeah.
I hate listening to other people read things because inevitably I think I could do that better. And that happens with professional audiobooks. It's not just I have very fond memories of some of my relatives reading to me when I was a child, little child. But as soon as I could learn to read for myself, to decode the letters on the page, I was off like a shot, and I was reading more than anyone could read aloud to me. Um, and I think only one of my relatives continued to read aloud to me after I was a competent reader. But what that relative did is the caliber of what was being read aloud moved up.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was able to start reading really strongly, and I was devouring like everything in the World War II section of the library, not just the kids section, but like I found my way to the adult section. And I remember being, I don't know, like 6 years old, reading Guadalcanal Diaries and a book called Frogmen about the UDT teams that became the Navy SEALs later. And all, I mean, just I devoured everything I get my hands on. Well, she started reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to me. And then there were some biographies of like famous people, that she also read, and like whatever I was reading, she found something that was just a little bit beyond what I could have easily read, and she read it aloud to me. As I got older, I moved away from listening to people read. I didn't enjoy that. I really hated listening to classmates read in class. I didn't like listening to just I don't mind going to a production of a play, although I find it very hard to do so even now and not just reflexively critique critical elements. And I do the same thing with film.
Yeah.
But
it's a hazard of being a drama major.
But one of the great secrets that we discovered early on in our odyssey of home education is that one of the ways to get in more material at a higher level than your kids can read with their eyes is to teach them to read with their ears, which helps train a few things. It helps train attentive listening. It helps train memory and processing. Over and above the content of whatever they're listening to.
And so you can tell from his own memories, the value of a read aloud is, the whole family can share the book together rather than everyone being caught in their own world. Nothing wrong with reading on your own, but it's also good to read and digest a story at the same time. However, sometimes you lose your voice.
Or things are crazy busy, or you've got to suddenly go on a trip that takes you away from the comfortable routine, but leaves you with lots of time to fill in where you're in a constrained space.
Yeah, because like at the moment, our evening reading routine, we've been reading a charming little children's book about.
Oh, you can promote the book.
Of course,
it needs to be more widely loved and read.
Oh yes,
so it's a new series called Chester Midshipmouse.
It is about mice at the United States Naval Academy who have their own naval mouse academy. And it is the most darling thing, and the children love it. And it's not twee. It's got some really serious topics that it's dealing with. As you've got mice going through a collegiate education and all the stresses of military life and having to deal with things like honor and whether or not to persevere and all sorts of wonderful things. So we've been reading that aloud. You've been reading
Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life.
And
yes, reading that aloud to the kids. I'm also reading it silently to myself because I read much faster silently than I read aloud. But we've been working through that. We've been working through Chester Midshipmouse. We just finished. So we've been doing the read alouds for so long now that there are books that we know we've read, but we read them to our older kids who were little at the time. So the younger kids haven't gotten them. So we just finished for us a reread of the Jungle Book, but for our youngest 3.
Yeah.
it was really their first introduction to, not Jungle Book, Just So Stories.
Just So Stories.
We're going to tackle Jungle Book next. But like there's a chapter from The Wind and the Willows, Dulce Domum, that I read every year right around Christmas. Every year right around Christmas, I'll do a read aloud of
A Christmas Carol. And so we've got some that we circle back to a lot. But the thing about it is, as I said, there's that year when it's Christmas, and that's when the cold hit, or worse, when everything hits, and trying to get everyone in the same room at the same time with us in there too becomes really difficult. And one of the beauties of an audiobook is there you have the book well recorded, and you can pop it on and you can say, I'm so sorry that my voice is tired. Let's listen to this.
Well, I mean, and there are other sources. So we have a lot of books that we have purchased on CD. We have them on media. We've got Lord of the Rings, the complete Lord of the Rings. We've got The Hobbit. We've got the New Testament in a dramatized reading with a really, really great cast.
King Solomon's Mines.
We've got King Solomon's Mines. We've got The Prisoner of Zenda. And then our oldest has to read Willa Cather's My Antonia for one of his online classes. And we didn't have a copy around the house. And we ordered it through Amazon, but even Amazon's going to take 3 or 4 days to get a copy to us. So he found a copy on LibriVox, which is free. And he's listening to it so that he can spend his prep time making his way through the book. And he's actually supplemented a lot of his visual reading over the last 4 years of this program that he's been in, finding sometimes not great, but finding recordings that use one of the versions of the text he's got, particularly when it's a work in translation, and listening along as he's reading to further reinforce.
Yes. And that's one of the things that I find important is that you can be a strong reader and still benefit if it's, well, you can listen to the book while you're doing your daily walk.
Yeah.
And continue to get the reading in without having to be tucked in a chair in the one quiet room in the house.
Yeah. I mean, and that's definitely got benefits, because particularly with the portability of streaming media and of being able to put media on things like phones, if you want to take it offline, you can be a lot more ambulatory and still get through your audiobooks. I mean, people listen to podcasts for the same reason, and there are definitely some great podcasts out there. We probably ought to do just an episode. Just do a show on like some highly recommended podcasts.
Oh, certainly. I've got a list of ones that I consider go-tos for inspiration.
But I mean, I think anybody who's been watching anything on YouTube over the last 10 years or so, Audible has ads everywhere. They sponsor lots of podcasters and YouTubers. So Audible is a source if you want to pay for it.
Which, if you're looking at new stuff, the thing about LibriVox is it's free because everything is in the public domain.
Yeah.
Now, if you're in a class where you're reading,
but the consistency can be it is very inconsistent.
Yes, I mean, it's like occasionally you're like, wow, that was a good production. That they
and then others
they turned off the air conditioning when they did the recording.
Yeah, others you can't.
It sounds like it's in a tin can, and yeah. But when you can find a good recording, LibriVox can be good because that's a lot of stuff is in the public domain.
We've bought a lot though.
Yeah.
We bought a lot of audiobooks. For like kids stuff. Jim Dale recorded a whole bunch of audiobooks. It was Jim Weiss recorded a bunch of others. Some of them are like abridged versions of the books they do. Others are unabridged. There are plenty of people that I know the Internet Archive has like a bunch of old radio dramas, like people who adapted either early comic books or like Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories. A lot of those were done as radio dramas before the advent of television. So those can also, if you expand kind of your idea of what an audiobook is, there's a century of recorded audio media that's essentially at your fingertips if you look for it, that can help bring to life a lot of what you're encountering. This is a pet peeve of mine with Shakespeare, is that people read Shakespeare, and Shakespeare was never meant to be read. Actors read Shakespeare to get a sense of how they're going to stage Shakespeare. And Shakespeare in particular is performative. So if you have to tackle Shakespeare, whether it's in an institutional school or you're homeschooling, get thee to a production. I believe the RSC has released on either DVD or audio recording a complete works. I know our library has most of them. There are good film adaptations. Local productions still occur periodically, and some of them are even good. But you've got to get out there and experience it. Other things, the nice thing about read alouds is that you can read something that's a little beyond what your reader can read with his or her eyes.
And this is actually where I want to pull in something. We keep saying reading with your ears. And this is a phrase that we have grabbed from Andrew Pudewa of the Institute for Excellence in Writing. And he had an entire, he's a huge proponent of read alouds and especially audiobooks.
Yeah.
And one of the things reasons he became so passionate is that one of his children had some pretty severe dyslexia. And as a result, that child spent most of their early childhood listening to books rather than struggling through readers. Now, obviously, all along the way, trying to teach the child to read, but they were consuming books far above their reading level because their reading level was stuck in a struggle zone.
Yeah, if I remember one of the anecdotes he relates correctly, the boy was in his early teens. He was reading at like a first or a second grade level, really still struggling with reading in terms of decoding with the eyes and processing the visual image. And there was a discussion in the house about another book, and I think it was Frankenstein or something like that. And it was like, oh yeah, I read that. And the whole family was like, wait, you read that? He goes, yeah. Like, but yeah, I read it with my ears.
And that's when you realize that there's two different things going on with a book. Yes, you can read it with your eyes, but consuming it through audio, having heard it read to you, means that you have received that story, and possibly at a slower, more digestible pace than if you're kind of skimming because you're desperate to finish it before class time.
And even more so if you've been through a speed reading course, because the techniques taught in speed reading allow you to skip over a lot of the actual content, and consequently, you don't actually process that. Whereas when you're listening to an audiobook, you're hearing each word in sequence and processing it as such.
And so if you do have a child who has a learning disability like dyslexia, an audiobook is wonderful because you're not keeping them stuck at, the easy reader level and not getting beneficial stories that they can comprehend. They just can't decode.
And that's a key thing to understand about reading. What we call reading is actually a conflation of several different discrete activities in terms of what's going on in the brain and what the body is doing. And so there's an elementary stage of decoding where you learn to recognize the symbols and the associated sounds and piece them together. And that's where phonics and syllabification really come in. Learning sentence structure and punctuation so you can, again, decode the symbols and
know when to pause and stop.
And begin to process what's there. There's a second thing that involves a different part of the brain that's actually comprehending what you read. And at least the way most of us, I think, were taught in school over the last, say, 40 to 50 years, at least in the US. I can't speak for other countries and their approaches to reading. But for those who kind of learned whole language, you were learning to puzzle out and then, kind of pick up what it was and process it. Well, or if you learned phonics, you learned to decode the symbols, and you had lots of exercises around that. at the same time that you were being asked to answer elementary reading comprehension questions. Who did the thing? Why did they do the thing? Where did they do the thing? That sort of stuff. But those are two separate parts of the brain that execute those two activities. If you're struggling with the decoding end, then you can make a lot of progress with the whole comprehension and challenging ideas and interesting stuff.
Yeah, and if you are a parent who's got a child with dyslexia and you're trying to get a slight feel for what this feels like, try to pick up Greek and suddenly put yourself in the position of having to learn an entirely new alphabet that your eyes aren't used to.
Yeah, Greek or Hebrew.
Yeah. Hebrew even more so, because you have to read the opposite direction from what you're used to. But in either case, you're trying to do multiple things, learning a new alphabet and how it works at the same time that you're also having to pick up new words and comprehend them.
Yeah.
And you recognize there's a lot of stuff going on there. And so what's really wonderful is, let's say you've got a kid who's kind of at the frog and toad level, and they're wonderful stories. I have very, very fond memories of all of the Frog and Toad books. But if you're, second, third grade and kind of frustrated that that's where you're at, because your brain can listen to things like The Wind in the Willows and listen to about, Toad of Toad Hall and
Mr. Toad's Wild Ride.
Oh, yes. And these stories that are something you can apprehend even while your reading level is well below where that story is.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think is really important for an audiobook, is to recognize that all read alouds are going at your level of understanding of the language, not your ability to decode the language.
Yeah. And if you yourself are not a strong reader, if you have if there are complications like an illness that deprives you of your voice, if you travel a lot. I've heard of grandparents recording audiobooks for their grandkids to listen to. I've heard of
which it's so much easier to do that now.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's like all you need is a microphone, and most computers have got a way to easily record, and there's free software for editing, and you can send an MP3 by email to give them
post it to a share site or something like that.
It's like, compared to 20 years ago,
recording and distribution are trivial obstacles to doing that now. It's allocating the time and doing it, and not even necessarily doing it professionally. Again, grandparents reading to their grandkids. Well, how many grandkids, once they become adults and their grandparents are dead and gone, would love to be able to hear that grandparent's voice again, particularly reading a beloved story and that memory from childhood and all that triggers in the conscious and subconscious mind.
And that's also a way to invite extended family into your family's schooling journey, because frequently you have this thing, especially if families are separated by distance. How can I help?
And supportive. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if it's like, what would be lovely is if you could record a book that you'd want to read to them if you were here. Now you've got that opportunity. They're getting to share in reading stories, and stories are really at the heart of education.
Yeah.
It's one of the essential activities, is consuming good books. It's not the only activity, but it is one of the essentials. And sometimes you're not a strong enough reader and you're working on it, but you want something more complex than what you can read yourself. Sometimes you're on the road, sometimes you're
so there's you can enlist family to help. I was reading an article, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 years ago now, about a guy who traveled for his job.
Yeah.
And what he would do in the evenings after he was done working in his hotel room is he would record books that he would then leave with his kids when he went on his next business trip. And so they could listen to dad read every night to them. They would just do another track from the CDs that he left behind. And I mean, I don't remember the fellow's name or even where I ran into the story, but I remember thinking that's a lot of dedication because, I mean, I'm guessing 15, 20 years ago, whenever he started doing that, that was a much bigger technical lift in order to get any kind of decent audio out of, a laptop. You couldn't just kind of whip out a phone and create a track raw with a high quality mic and camera and all. But again, where there's a will, there's a way. So you can do your own recordings.
Library. Do not forget the
libraries have lots of audiobooks.
One of my daughters was one of our later readers. We've had a mix of ones who decided to start reading at 4 and ones who it took them until.
And then there's the one who taught himself.
Yeah.
Just incidentally.
Yes.
He just.
Yeah, we've had a mix. We had the one who was struggling until he got glasses, and it's like, oh, well, that's why you were having trouble.
Couldn't see anything.
You couldn't see. But I have a couple of them where it's like their brains, they had prioritized that. It wasn't even dyslexia. It was just their brains had prioritized other stuff. And then at one point a switch flipped and they could read. And all of the stuff we'd been prepping just kind of hit. But until that point, one of our daughter, it took her forever for everything to fall into place. But in the meantime, she was devouring books from the library. I mean, she went through just about everything by Roald Dahl.
That's the thing.
A lot of Beverly Cleary.
A lot of libraries do have an extensive audiobook collection for kids, which is something I didn't realize till our daughter started looking for them. Like I was aware that they had, the adult audiobooks, some of which I would occasionally check out because, when I still had a regular commute, I'd occasionally listen to like a Grisham novel or a Tom Clancy novel. I'd find interesting stuff to listen to on my commute when I, got tired of listening to the radio or whatever.
But when
but they've got lots of kids books, and some of it's even really good stuff. I mean, I know we've found really good recordings of like Winnie the Pooh.
There's the Winnie the Pooh one is excellent.
You'll have to like find a link to that or something like that. Let me think. What are some of the other classics we've had the kids listen to because they found them on the shelf?
I believe they've gone through the entirety of Lloyd Alexander's Prydain Chronicles.
Yeah, the Prydain Chronicles audiobooks are fantastic, and I found those very difficult to read aloud. Like I enjoy doing.
It's the Welsh. All of the Welsh names. It does make it challenging, and that's what the other thing is that sometimes if you're dealing with, say, something set in another country, and even though it's in English, all of the names are still in a foreign tongue that you're uncomfortable or unfamiliar with, and you're not even certain necessarily how to pronounce some of it. If you've got a really well done audio recording, someone else is telling you how to properly pronounce that. And it takes away a stumbling block from encountering some really good literature.
Children's Homer. We've got a really, really good recording of the Children's Homer by Padraic Colum.
Which I can't recommend enough. It is the best summary of the Odyssey and the Iliad, written in a style that is suitable for children. Although if you get the hard copy book, it's also got some very charming illustrations, kind of done in the style of Greek pottery type illustrations. But yeah, that's one of the things the library was one. We had so many good ones. There's and then also some really interesting newer stuff too, because in amongst all of the sort of what you'd call children's classics, all of those good books that are preparatory to reading the great books, you've also got, and there's also sort of like the popular series. Like I think they've got audiobooks of all the Diary of a Wimpy Kid stuff too.
Can those be turned into audiobooks? I thought they were all illustrations.
They're illustrated, but they're actually pretty text heavy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's
learn something new every day.
Yeah, I mean, they're funnier if you can see all of the sort of stick figure type illustrations, but you can actually turn them into audiobooks. But I mean, amongst everything, I mean, you've got everything from, Newbery Honor winners to popular fiction. But some of the newer fiction, there was a story, I think it's called Peter Pan and Scarlet, which took off from where J.M. Barrie left off and wrote a new adventure with the characters in Neverland.
I remember the that floating around the house at one point.
And we've discovered some I think Victoria got through one of Jack London's short stories that
Yes,
way.
yes, which I have always found Jack London unreadable. I don't.
This is a reminder, just because it's a classic piece of literature doesn't mean you're going to love it. I mean, that's how Victoria feels about the Anne of Green Gables books. I know that some people love them. I loved them. And then there's other things, like there's a whole series. I love the Little House on the Prairie series, and I think I've read aloud about like 3.5 of them to the kids. But I run out of steam, and there's other things that I want to read aloud. Well, if someone gloms onto them, I'm pretty sure the library has the entirety of the Little House series. And that's, again, something fantastic to read. You've got some great stories going on. You've got a ton of American history packed into them. And frequently, if it's a series, your library will almost always have the whole set. And if they don't, if you request from the librarians, the library will frequently buy the whole set, especially if it's something like Laura Ingalls Wilder, because there's going to be ongoing demand for those books. They don't really go out of style.
So yeah, I mean, you've got there are inexpensive and low cost options. I've actually found a lot of books read aloud, the audio, without distracting video, on YouTube. I have no idea what the copyright situation of that is. Although if it's a public domain work, that there probably isn't one. But and you can do you don't just have to do fiction this way. You can get nonfiction texts, you can get biographies, historical texts if they're well written. There's really this whole world. And I'm sure if we talk to some of our mathsy, sciencey friends, they could point us in the direction of really good like audio books for maths and sciences. I had a cousin who I think was listening to, I don't remember if it was something on like chaos theory, or maybe it was like an audiobook of Stephen Hawking's Brief History of the Universe or something like that. I remember him listening to that in high school or college. Might have been high school, because I think he had it on audio cassette, pop the tapes in and swap the tapes out and re-reel them when they get.
I mean, there's ones I can think of where you actually really do want the illustrations. Like there was a math book called Flatter Land, and it was getting into some really sophisticated things, but you actually needed the illustrations to understand it. But if it's something that is text heavy, then usually there's going to be an audiobook if it got sufficient popularity. And that is a really fantastic thing to add to your toolkit.
Yeah, and I mean, so you've got commercial options, you've got free options, you've got very low cost options, you've got the sort of friends and family collaboration is an option, and so there's a resource available to fit every budget, and it can be a huge benefit to everybody involved, and it can make for a very enjoyable way to cover a lot of material that otherwise could result in tears, frustrations, or just be missed entirely.
I mean, if you've got a deadline, you have a book that you have to finish, and your family gets called away on a trip over the weekend that you were supposed to be reading. Well, if you can find the audiobook for it, that's several hours of car time when you can listen to it that would otherwise result in probably getting ill if you tried to read it in the car. So with that,
read with your ears. Encourage your children to read with their ears.
And take advantage of that opportunity to get in lots and lots and lots of good books. I think that covers us for this week.
I hope so.
Okay. So this has been the slightly longer, chattier version of a blog post that I post every week at our blog, lampstandforlearning.com. And we also do have socials, which I will make the point when I do the edit of getting into our description, so that
some socials and some links in the show notes to various things we mentioned.
I'll try to get links to all of the various books and authors that we mentioned. I'll make sure that there are links to all of the social sites where you can find us. Please connect with us. In the meantime, like and subscribe to the channel, and doing all those happy YouTube things. Someday I'll have a script for it even.
I don't know. I think people at this point know that's what you're supposed to do if you like the thing.
Yes, but I have often heard that people will go back and look at their analytics and discover, despite that they've only got like 20% of their viewership liked and subscribed.
Oh, okay.
So
all right.
that's why it's become boilerplate.
Okay.
So anyhow,
maybe we can just get a little like card.
Yeah, there we go. Do all the things. Ring the bell.
There was a video I was watching earlier this week. Obviously, very well produced by a professional team, and instead of the on-air talent talking about like, subscribe, etc., there were just graphics that popped up that encouraged you to do those things without interrupting the whole flow of the presentation.
Brilliant.
It was brilliant. And I'm sure it requires, I mean, obviously it's for recorded rather than live streamed. It's something you put in post-production editing.
Yeah.
But anyway, before we go down a rabbit hole, thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoyed it and found it edifying. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, criticisms, thoughts on the speed of a lightning bolt, please go ahead and drop them in the comments or email us at
Laura@lampstandforlearning.com.
Okay, go ahead and make sure that's, accessible to our viewers.
I will put it
And
there.
we will talk to you again next week.
Alrighty, thank you.
Ciao, ciao.